I wanted to make a video because I set out a couple months ago thinking I was going to make a YouTube channel about my GPU hardware business, and as of today, decided that we're no longer going to go forward with that. So we're selling off the business. We're selling off all the GPUs, but I do still want to make content. So I had the idea, just start putting out videos that are more like a journal for myself of whatever I'm working on, whether it's the liquidation of this current business or maybe it's whatever I'm working on next. But it is something that I want to do. I think that content's super powerful, and even for myself, I'd love to have some kind of journal or something I can look back on at the end of this whole experience. The reason behind leaving the GPU as a service business is it's pretty clear. When we started doing it, a long time ago, it was sort of just like a little basement project going on, and you really couldn't miss. You could buy an RTX 4090 for, I live in Canada, so they were like 2,500 Canadian dollars, and you'd be getting almost $1 an hour from renting it to somebody. This all in Canadian dollars. And then that continued for sort of when the 4090 was released. They were hard to get. You're just driving all over buying them. As that continued, sort of scaled it up in the US. And, we had a business where we would buy 4090s for $1,600 to $2,000 US. And we could just put them on a bookshelf with a couple motherboards, and we'd rent those to people for 60 cents US to some days we'd be getting 80 cents US. And this was driven by all kinds of stuff. This was crypto, sort of early stages of training. People would go on Vast AI and just rent up a whole bunch of GPUs. We were distributing them through Vast. So it was no matter what you did, you made money, and the value of the cards stayed strong. The rental rates were staying strong. The standards that you needed to set for your data center were super low. Like I said, you could just do this in your basement, plug in a couple 4090s, max out all your breakers, and run them at 90 degrees, and people would still pay you. They'd still rent them, make a couple $1,000 a month doing that. The concept was great, right? Through those years, we scaled it up, found some investors, was able to basically push the concept of a warehouse data center as far as you possibly want to go with that. By the end, we had about 800 GPUs, 3090s and 4090s all running. We converted from using just industrial shelving and doing the classic open air miner crypto mining kind of thing, and we'd fully case these up in server chassis. We'd contained all the hot air. We were venting that out the roof. So we had this ultra cost efficient data center. With that obviously came a ton of scaling challenges. So we got a huge improvement by sort of taking the route of casing these things and controlling the airflow, but there's so much more to a data center than just having the power and ability to run the equipment, right? When customers are renting this stuff, when they hear data center, they're expecting battery backup, generator backup, physical security. So you need to have a security guard on site 24/7 to basically get all of the certifications that a lot of these places need. And then there's all these standards around the fire suppression, the power and cooling. And this stuff is all the physical infrastructure for this stuff is in such high demand right now because there's $100 billion projects popping up all over the place that are buying up all the supply of these things. So your ability to sort of do this on your own is really hindered by the fact that the equipment is just so hard to come by. That's sort of the challenges, I guess, that we faced in the business. And it was sort of towards the end of last year, I was looking at what do we want to do next? I think that, there's still life in the business. The current market rates are you buy a 4090, it's $2,000. A 5090 is maybe almost $2,500. You can maybe get a little less. But then the rental rates for a 30 or a 4090 are 30 cents an hour. For a 5090, we were charging 45 cents, but we had, a lot of idle time. We would have gone all the way down to 35 cents in a lot of cases for a 5090. The profitability was totally shot. I was looking at basically, how do I expand this? I was looking at, who do we need to hire to help me stabilize this thing or deal with shit when it all goes to like the power goes out and then everything needs to come back up. Like who's going to manage that? Because I was pretty sick of doing that. I was looking at the scaling options and ultimately, noticed that the hardware, even like the GPUs, the memory, all of that stuff is so hard to buy right now. So I ended up deciding like this might be the opportunity to sell it, because like half the people that were trying to sell me the stuff were also willing to buy a lot of the same stuff. Like for context on that, like the memory market alone, like we were buying 32 gig DDR4 DIMMs for like, $25 a stick, like less than $1 a gig. And I looked at eBay today and they were like well over $250 a stick. So like almost a 10x appreciation. Those are retail prices, obviously, but the value of this stuff is like more than we paid for it years ago. That made me think like, look, if there was ever an opportunity to get out of this thing, it kind of feels like we're selling the top. And the state of the business is, I think if you're going to do GPU as a service, you got to do it the right way. If there's hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into this thing, like you're competing against that in the market. And something I've noticed sort of from my participation in crypto over the years is like, there's a lot of idle GPUs out there. Like people will tell you, oh, they're constrained, oh, they're all reserved, we're sold out. But there's a lot of companies spinning this stuff up, and a lot of them don't really know how to get them in the hands of certain people. A lot of them don't build it properly. So, like if they're missing certifications, there's like entire parts of the market that you can't even participate in. So, of these hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into this thing, like not a lot of it is actually basically being consumed by the GPU as a service market. I think just the competition is really, really strong. I think that the way that we built ours was super profitable, worked great, but it's not going to survive against the big cap data centers. And I think that the game, went from this like 100% a year return on capital to like, you spend $1 billion, you get a 20% return on capital if you do it right, which is awesome if you have $1 billion, right? It's not awesome if you're working with, a couple $1 million. It's just, you have a really high paying job. And there's a lot that can go wrong that can fuck that whole thing up for you. So I wanted to also talk about, so where do I think the opportunity is with GPU infrastructure? I kind of touched on it there. Like, I think it's a big cap game. So I think it's companies that are building these, huge gigawatt projects. They need people to help them consume it. Like, obviously, if it's Meta and they're building it to train the next Llama model, that's very different. But there's a lot of projects where, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars are being poured into data centers with the intention of renting those out and getting a return on that capital. Like, I think the opportunity is helping the process of putting those GPUs in people's hands. And that might be like, I've done a bit of work in this where you help data centers monetize their idle inventory. So that's like aggregating up a whole bunch of like H200 supply and trying to sell that back out. Like maybe you just dump it into crypto and get something for it. Or there's all kinds of workload that would run if compute was half the price. So like a good example is like if I know a data center has 1,000 idle GPUs, like you're talking about like tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure just doing nothing. And then there's a company that wants to do a training run, but there's no way they would do that at market price. Like you might be able to work out a deal where a company can use the infrastructure for a week, a month, just while it's idle, right? So I think stuff like that is truly valuable. And then I also think that just where we're at with AI, and as somebody who just writes a whole bunch of dog shit code with AI, it's getting good. Like its ability to make mistakes and then just keep churning through tokens and fix them. I think that, we're kind of at the point now where it's just going to be able to do a lot of stuff. So I also think that moving farther up the stack, away from the infrastructure to do anything, like I just think every industry is super, super set up to be optimized or completely taken over by AI. A good anecdote for that is when I worked at Dell and I was selling GPU infrastructure. I was covering some like CSPs or MSP CSPs, and they would buy infrastructure from us and then add services and like manage that for the customer. That's sort of how that business works. It would basically, if they were spending $10 million buying like server storage and networking from us, they would be supporting that with like $100 million contract from their customer. So just that, like from taking it from, the raw infrastructure to like almost just infrastructure as a service, they were able to basically 10x the amount of money that was coming in on that. And then like above that, like just above the infrastructure service, like you've got, you know, platform as a service, you've got software as a service, you've got all these things that are just added layers of value that are adding sort of multipliers onto, what that base level infrastructure is actually capable of. And like another good example of this is something like Dropbox, which is, obviously a huge multi-billion-dollar company. Like their price sensitivity to the cost of the hard drive is basically nothing because they operate on it's like an 80% gross margin or something. Like it's absolutely like they are a storage company, but it's absolutely disconnected from the price of storage. It's like there's so many value added services on top of what the infrastructure is that, they don't really care really what the hard drives cost. Obviously, like they care, but they could literally double or triple, and Dropbox is still an insanely profitable business. So I think that's just the concept that I want to take into whatever I do next. I still think, like I said, I still think there's opportunities with GPU infrastructure. I just think the opportunities to use this massive oversupply of GPU infrastructure is way bigger than adding to the oversupply. And I could be wrong. Maybe demand will start to scale as fast as supply is scaling. But that's kind of the conclusion. Is in the current state, we're scaling GPU supply faster than demand for it is scaling, and it's just making it very, very competitive, right? And as a super small player who just cut every corner, the writing is sort of on the wall where these other suppliers, when they have to drop their prices because there's an oversupply, like we're not the guys that are going to get rented for cheap because we have like the inferior product to everybody else. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. A lot of doom and gloom, but I do, like I said, I think just making these videos as a journal for myself, any of my family and friends that want to kind of follow along with what I'm doing. Yeah, that was my goal. So I'm gonna watch this thing back, and if I'm not like too cringed out by it, I think it's going online. Anyways, so yeah.